Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture podcast. I can't believe it. It was a little milestone I'd actually passed and didn't realize that we've done over 50 podcasts now. They've been fantastic fun to do. It's been great just to talk fishing with people. And I hope that somewhere in the line, it's a strange world we live in, that these have been something that has distracted you and taken you to the river or the lake or wherever it is for a very, very short time. So these are just going to keep coming. And yeah, there's plenty more planned for down in the pipeline that will be coming out very, very soon. I plan to do another listener questions session, which seem to be rather popular with people. So if you fancy sending me some questions, I'll try my best to answer them, or I'll get somebody who's better than me to answer them. But you can send them to me on email at pete@flyculturemag.com. You can find me on Facebook under Pete Tigers, so you can send me a message there, or via the Fly Culture Facebook page as well. So you can find me there. So if you've got any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. But today's going to be a fascinating one. I'm going to be talking to Jim Murray, and he was involved with taking on the back of our salad washing plant, and they'd been consistently polluting the River Isle in Hampshire. What I want to do is try and learn about what they did, and possibly it might inspire others to take on serial polluters of the rivers. To give you a little bit of background about Jim, he's an actor. He's just directed a documentary about the mental health benefits to be found in fly fishing, and he's also an ambassador of the Atlantic Salmon Trust. Jim, how's it going? It's good to have you here.
Morning, Pete. Good to be here, mate. Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm a huge fan of the show, and I'm humbled and honored to be here and to be your guest today.
Well, it's been great. I know we've been chatting in the background for a little while when you told me about the salad plant, and it seems it's been really interesting, isn't it, that the volume about these sorts of issues by yourself and others like Fergal as well has been turned up a little bit. And what we're trying to do is engage people, not just in the fishing community, but on a wider basis. And do you sense that's getting a little bit louder, that volume now?
I do. I mean, with regards to what you were talking about, certainly locally, the chalk streams, there's a real groundswell that's increasing about that. I'm not sure exactly why. I think there's a mixture of lockdown has refocused people on the great outdoors, and people have gone on walks and seen what's around them and learn about it and become aware of the issues facing it. I think NGOs, social media, and the like have become much more prevalent and much more vocal. And reaching a much wider audience. I mean, Parliament are getting involved now and are listening. So, it's a great time to have the stage and to have a proper platform to talk about the issues that these rivers face.
It's almost mildly ironic, isn't it? Because if you think about the book and the film Salmon Fishing in the Yemen, the politicians realized there was a lot of people fishing and decided to get behind schemes. And I just wonder now, with this, as you say, with license sales going up, people going outdoors, that people in these sort of places now are taking notice and saying, right, actually there are a lot of people involved with it. They could potentially be voters, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's probably a realistic way of looking at it, and you're quite right to be cynical about these politicians. But yeah, I mean, people vote with their feet, and if they're going outside and they're fishing, and let's face it, the fishing licenses go direct to the EA, so the government have got eyes on those numbers. They're probably going, oh look, we got a quick win here. But yeah, it's a fantastic thing to read if you're to believe the press, which I do, that suddenly fishing, and in particular fly fishing, which is my passion, has gone off the charts recently because of lockdown. And I think long may it continue, because it's the gateway to awareness, and we are the gatekeepers to a lesser or greater extent of the rivers. So I think it can only be a good thing that government are getting behind it and paying attention to how many people are fishing.
And you mentioned lockdown there, and this ties in. We're going to go into your fishing timeline very, very shortly, but the mental health aspect of the lockdown environment. And do you think that's where, and having just sort of directed a documentary about it, do you think this is something that is helping people now that they can get outside, hopefully and will continue to be able to get outside. Do you think that's certainly been a contributing factor to help people through some of this process as well?
Unquestionably, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it all started on my journey, and I think I'm no different to anyone else. When I rediscovered fly fishing 10, 12 years ago, and it took me outside and it put me in the rivers, and fish don't reside in ugly places, so all of a sudden it opened my eyes to the beauty of nature around me. And I think obviously the pandemic has forced people outside, and let's face it, there were very few things they were allowed to do at the beginning, I think, apart from fish and play golf. And that sort of forced them into fly fishing. And I think there is a real connection between mental health and fishing, certainly fly fishing for me. And it's, I mean, I could wax on about it for hours, but to put it succinctly, I think when you're doing something which involves movement, in this case fly fishing, but obviously other people, it's playing instruments, dancing, it's many things, painting, whatever, some sort of creative movement mixed with a focus, a challenge, which is in this case landing that fly over there, trying to catch that fish, trying not to get tangled behind you, whatever it is. If you sort of match those crosshairs of your skill set perfectly matching the challenge in front of you, then that's a great thing for mental health. And there's a study, and it's called about being in flow. And it's a positive psychology term that was coined in the 70s. And if you can, as I say, if you can get those crosshairs in line and match your challenge with the skill set, then you will be in flow. And if you're in flow, then endorphins and serotonin and all those wonderful chemicals are released, and the rest of the world sort of melts away. So I think that's how fly fishing, certainly for me and other people I speak to as well, how it has such a sort of strong connection with mental health, and can be a real healer.
That's really interesting, because I call it, when I'm fishing, and it's looking at it from a slightly different angle, but it's probably exactly, when you describe that, made me think of it, is that in the zone. And you realize you're focusing on just one thing entirely. And then as a result of that, that takes you somewhere else as well, doesn't it? And do you think that's part of it as well, that you've gone from perhaps a different place to this one, and you're focusing on that one moment, and that's good for you, I guess? Is that what you're saying, I guess? It's
exactly the same thing. Being in flow, being in the zone. There was a professor, still around, Mihai, he's quite a mouthful, but he took a load of sportsmen and artists over a 10-year period and did a study about exactly that, what it is about being in the zone that sort of gives them the happiness and that sort of vortex of time, if you like, where everything else disappears, all the problems sort of melt away when you're in the river, right? And he took athletes, musicians, people that were very high achievers, and used them as examples, studied them to see what it was. And he found that every time you're focused on a goal, which is what I was talking about, as long as your skill set is kind of either side of it, and you're not too good that you're bored, or you're not so bad you're never going to achieve it and you become frustrated, then you get in the zone, you become in flow. And he's a big advocate that the more flow we can get in our lives, the happier we're going to be. And that's exactly the same as what you just said. It's just another way of saying being in the zone. And in my opinion, that sort of, in my humble opinion, that goes all the way back to Eastern religion and meditation and Zen and Southeast Asian culture. It's all about that sort of very zeitgeisty term now about being in the moment. It's very topical, but it's all related, I think. And fly fishing can really offer you that state of mind.
I realize when I get in it myself and I start talking to the fish, i.e. if it's in there or if it's risen and taken the fly, I say, gotcha.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't have taken that, or whatever, and I know that's the moment when everything else around me is gone, and I'm just focusing on that one moment. And I think that's why we love it so much, isn't it, for those moments as well?
I think so. And I think I implore everybody to sort of, that's what I'm trying to get across in this documentary, is it may not be fishing, right? That might not be the thing that puts you in flow, but find something, because we can all find something. It can be Sudoku or jigsaws or gardening or whatever, something that can put you in that state of mind that you were just so eloquently talking about, where, you know, in our world, we end up becoming a fish or conversing with a fish. You know, it's the same in every hobby, passion that becomes a passion, but just get one, because I think that's the first major step. You know, a lot of people rely on the screen and rely on something else to somehow give them what they want, and they don't quite understand that you've got to invest a little bit in order to get something back. And I think that's what we're saying here.
And do you think we will see a little bit more of a shift from that, as you say, the screen thing, that people are just sitting, you know, and I'm sure you've seen it, and Emma and I, when we can go out for lunch, we see people not even talking to each other. They're both, do you think we might start to see, and that outside pursuits as a whole may sort of start to swing that away a little bit?
Well, I hope so. It's going to be a big battle, isn't it? I mean, the powers that be, the technological gods, are hell bent on keeping us married to that screen and our kids and the younger generations. But, you know, some good things come out of bad, such as the pandemic, and it forces us outside and forces us to become aware again, and reimagine our surroundings and enjoy them again. So I don't know. I think it's going to be a constant challenge, and I think it'll be generational, and the older generation will constantly be battling with the younger generation to get them off their screens and get them outside and get them engaged in something that's slightly more, slightly less dormant and lazy, and slightly more interactive and natural, for want of a better word. But I think it's always going to be a struggle from now on in. But I would like to think so, Pete. That would be great, wouldn't it?
It would be really, really cool.
Yeah.
And the art of conversation can come back again as well.
Yeah, man, remember that?
Yeah.
Hopefully, just about. You're very good at it. I'm just about remembering it. You're being very good. You're reminding me.
So it sounds as though you sort of reconnected with fishing. We're going to go look into your timeline a little bit and learn a little bit about your fishing before we get on to the washing plant story. But you said you reconnected with it 10, 12 years ago. I on that basis, I assume that you've been fishing a very long time, and then other things got in the way, and then you came back to it. And where did your fishing journey start?
So my fishing journey started when I was a kid. I was 5, 6, 7 years old, and it was sea fishing, as a lot of people's is. And my dad had a part share in an old tugboat, diesel, fumey, awful thing. I mean, it was like being on that. If you didn't throw up, that was the goal. Just don't throw up, and you won. And we used to go out in the Irish Sea in North Wales, and we just used to hoik up mackerel and gut them on the boat. And we had like a factory line, and then we used to sell them on the beach. And that was when I sort of, fishing was forced upon me, I think, because that was his love. And then my grandfather was a fly fisherman, and he took me fly fishing on a reservoir when I was about 8 or 9. And I sort of went, this is a bit more exciting, because you can potentially see the fish, as opposed to mackerel, where you're just sort of winging it. And also you're not, the diesel fumes aren't everywhere, and seagulls squawking, and you don't have to sell these things, and your hands aren't covered in blood all day. So it was a bit more refined, if you like, and a bit quieter and a bit more engaging, I think. So he introduced me to reservoir trout fishing when I was about 10. Then, of course, it became very boring very quickly, and other things took over. Music, girls, cigarettes, alcohol, all those things that teenagers suddenly get blinded by, or certainly they did when I was a teenager. And then I moved to London and became an actor. And I grew up in the country. I grew up in Hereford and Greater Manchester, but predominantly Hereford, which was very rural. And I just needed to. I was in London. I remember thinking, what can I do that's close, that involves being outside? And I found Syon Park, which there's a great sort of fishery there, certainly great as far as Londoners are concerned. And I went down there and sort of rediscovered how to cast, and because my grandpa taught me, but it was very old school, and with a I think it was with a split cane rod. Yeah, then just never looked back. And then that sort of went on to salmon fishing. And once I discovered salmon fishing, that was it. I was, there was no turning back. And I moved to Hampshire, and of course we've got all these wonderful chalk streams on our doorstep. So it just became part of life. And just going back to the mental health, just to finish it off, about 11 years ago, my wife and I, we lost our first daughter, Ella Jane. She was young. She had a congenital heart defect, and I found it, it was tough. Of course, it was a massive trauma in our lives, and I didn't really know how to process it. And, some people have therapy, some people hit the bottle, everyone has different ways of dealing with these huge life traumas. And for me, no word of a lie, that my therapy was fishing. I would go and stand in a river for a day or 3 days or whatever it was. And it was a place for me to sort of process what was going on and how I could move forward from this. And it really helped. And I thought, wow, there's something here. And that sort of got me on the journey of discovering the mental health benefits, if you like.
Yeah. I'm obviously so sorry to hear that story. And if there was, anything that fishing helped you through that, and it must make your bond with it that much stronger, I guess, in some respects as well.
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, it's the place where, because life outside the river for me is just hectic and busy, thankfully, but nevertheless it is, that it's the sort of one place I can go that's mine. It's my office, if you like. It's my place where I can go and think problems through. It's also a place that I can remember Ella Jane for the short time we had her for, without being distracted or without, all the other distractions of life. I can go and cast for a few hours and my mind will drift back to that time. And I think that's really important. I think we all lose people in life, and it's really important to remember them, because it's so easy to sort of shelve them, put them on the shelf and go, I've grieved for them now, so it's time, that's done, and let's turn a corner. I think keeping their memory alive is really important, and that's what fishing does for me. Yeah.
Wow, that's an amazing story. You mentioned so many species there and sorts of fishing. Do you have a favorite then? Is there something, or you just love the whole thing for those reasons?
The silver rats are my favorite. The salmon. That's what Charles Jardine affectionately refers to them as. The wild Atlantic salmon. The steelhead. Kind of big fighting, fresh sea run game fish. What do it for me? Obviously, saltwater fly fishing is great, but I guess being a Northern Hemisphere guy and being UK based, getting to Scotland and Iceland and Norway and all those places that are still hopefully lucky enough to have the odd salmon knocking around, that's my mecca. I just have a thing for that fish. I don't know why. It's journey, it's story, it's the romance, the metaphor for life that is the Atlantic salmon's struggle upriver. It's just incredibly evocative and mesmerizing for me.
It's really interesting you mentioned the salmon and the way that you describe them, because with those particularly, it's not about the catch, it's everything that goes with it, doesn't it? And that moment when the line just goes is that moment that we, down where I am in Devon, we don't have many, but I'll put in hour after hour after hour just for that moment. And then my wife has got into it subsequently the last 8, 9, 10 years, and she feels the same and physically shakes when she puts that fish back, or if there's a pool. And we both have one fish each this year, and God, did we hit it hard. And nothing. And you're thinking, wow, but it didn't stop me enjoying it any less. And, I remember Emma and I walking along the river, and we'd had our asses kicked again. But I said, guys, we're so lucky we can do this, aren't we?
Yeah.
And that's the wonderful thing about that fish. And you say about the steelhead, and I've done a little bit of steelhead as well. Equally the same, almost verging on religion, I think they are, aren't they?
Yeah. I couldn't put it better myself. They're incredibly... untouchable and just out of reach and just out of sight, and nobody really knows why or what or why about the Atlantic salmon. It's all huge conjecture at this stage. So that's what makes it so magical, and it really fires up the imagination. And as you say, I mean, the tug is the drug, of course, and when you get that sort of bolt of electricity sent up your line and up your rod and into your heart, there's no better feeling in the world. But you only need to catch one, right? As you say, if you caught one this season, especially on your home turf. I mean, I caught my first one on my first chalk stream Atlantic salmon this season, and though it didn't, it wasn't the biggest fish and it perhaps wasn't the freshest fish, there was just something about going, I live here and these fish are here. These magical, mythical creatures that, that we're told are sort of dying out and certainly used to be when they were more abundant. They used to be pagan gods and used to be worshipped. And you can understand why. And you just go, I'm blessed to be able to sort of look it in the eye and send it back on its incredibly, on its odyssey, on its epic journey. So yeah, I like you. I just need one every now and then, a quick fix, and it'll keep me going for months and months and months. Yeah, I love them.
There's a fascinating book actually that I don't know if you've read. I'm just a little way through it, and it's called Salmon by Mark Kalansky. And it looks at fishing for salmon. It looks at all aspects of it. So it looks at the history, and he talks about, he's found reports of salmon when they were first discovered in North America, and they were just everywhere and huge numbers of them, and Europe, and how the monks used to look after, keep the salmon for themselves, and a lot of and how things have changed. And I've actually made there's a recipe they talked about in Alaska as well, and the last sort of bastion of big runs of salmon, and how he went out with some people who netted for them. It's controlled the netting, but there was a beer bread recipe in there, and I made the beer bread from it the other day, which was delicious. But I'd recommend it as a read, and I'm only a short distance through it, but it looks at the history of salmon from all sorts of angles, from Europe, North America, and everywhere else as well. And it's a really, really fascinating read. But I wanted to move on to, you mentioned chalk stream salmon, and I hate to anthropomorphize salmon, but I remember fishing the Wiley actually, and it was late on, we were fishing for grayling, but we watched these salmon swim. There was two of them, I won't forget it, and you could see the focus.
Yeah.
And nothing's going to get in my way. And they were weaving and working their way up the river there. And it was just amazing seeing them running the river like that, and how they were actually so determined to get to where they needed to be. Amazing, amazing fish.
Yeah. I mean, what's incredible about them is that whilst they're the spookiest fish in the world, if you're stood in the river and they're running, they don't give a damn. I mean, they'll run over your feet, they'll jump past you. And I was lucky enough to in Iceland recently, and it was just, I went, how come on the one hand you bolt up river when you see a tiny, size 18 hook come across your nose, yet you will literally swim over my over my foot when you're running. That's the beauty of them. They're just completely unpredictable.
Yeah, absolutely. And so coming on to the trout, I guess living where you live, you're doing a fair bit on the chalk streams for trout. And how did you find the season? Was it good?
Well, yeah, the season was good. I mean, it's been fantastic all over, hasn't it? For whatever reason. Yeah, I had a great season. I didn't do as much trout fishing as I'd have liked for one reason or another, but I got more than my fair share of salmon fishing this year and had a great season. I guess the thing about living on the chalk streams, and this might polarize a few listeners, but I'm kind of spoiled, and I've spent the last 10, 12 years fishing all the wilder beats of the upper Itchen, and the test is great, but it's not completely my bag to go and pull out a stocky, certainly for the money they charge, but wild brownies and grayling, I love hunting them, and I think it's cyclical, and I think you're really into one type of fly fishing for 1, 2, 3, 4 seasons, and then you put that rod down and you go, right, I'm going to go and catch some salmon, or I'm going to go and catch something else. So at the moment I'm sort of, I'm a huge supporter of the chalk streams. I love them to bits and they're very dear to my heart, but I don't fish them as much as I used to for whatever reason.
It's interesting what you say about you go through spells of 3-4 years. And it was funny, I was talking to a friend on the phone the other day, and I'd fished up on the chalk streams with a friend. It was a good friend's birthday, and I took him up for a day late in the season. And instead of the more modern techniques, we just fished an upstream nymph. The fish until the fish rose. And it was great fun. And then sometimes I, stuck an indicator. I've not fished like that for 20 odd years. Yeah. And I had a ball because I love making a cast to the fish and those sorts of aspects of it. And it was just fantastic to come at things from a slightly different angle, or an angle that you'd not used for quite some time is really good fun to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you sometimes forget them.
You do. I mean, you listen, wild fishing for wild fish, or ostensibly wild fish in the chalk streams, surrounded by all the sort of bucolic wonder that they offer, is hard to beat. And as you say, the style of fishing that it offers, sight fishing, is pretty rare, and a lot of people don't get the opportunity to do that if their local fishing is reservoir fishing. So yeah, we're really lucky, and you're absolutely right. It just shows how much of a variety there is if once you scratch the surface of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to come on to at the beginning. You said you thought you may have been taught with a split cane rod, and there has been, and I'm included in this as well because I love to fish with them as well. Is that something you sort of dabble in a little bit? Do you play with split cane as well?
Not until quite recently, when I know it's becoming quite fashionable again now, and glass rods. And I had someone lent me a little 7-foot a Hardy glass rod that they made. I think they made a bunch of them a couple of years ago, and then they stopped. And it was the most beautiful piece of equipment for a fly fisherman to sort of use. It was so soft yet so powerful. It loaded the line beautifully, and so I did dig out an old split cane rod only in the garden. And I went, yeah, this is different. I think I'll probably be tight. The way I cast, because I'm trying to get more finesse into my cast, but I tend to sort of do that thing that when you're a bit tired, you throw your shoulder into it more, and then that obviously just makes it, you just get tireder quicker. And I think a split cane rod, I mean, we were once fishing up on the Tyne, and we were fishing this beat that the Prince Charles had happened to be fishing the week before, and the Gilly was desperate to tell us, but also wasn't allowed to tell us. So he was it's one of those. But one thing that stood out, I remember, was that Prince Charles allegedly fishes his salmon rod is an old split cane rod that King George would it be the fourth, his granddad, him, for his 20th birthday. So. Yeah. And that's all he fishes with. He doesn't fish with any modern material, high-tech rod. And it's just overhead casting with this big 15-foot split cane rod. I said, he must be absolutely knackered. He said, yeah, lunchtime, he's had enough. That's it. He's yeah. So, yeah, I love the idea of a split cane rod, but I think it's a different type of casting, right? I mean, you tell me.
Yeah, it's slower, more relaxed.
Oh, it is. Well, yeah, then
yeah, absolutely, and it is. And I think John Girac, if I'm right in this quote, said casting with graphite is like writing with a word processor. Casting with bamboo is like using a fountain pen.
Yeah,
and it does. It slows everything down. And you take time. And I've read somewhere else as well that some instructors would use a bamboo rod because it would slow people down.
Yeah.
And whether that, I've not tried it myself, but I find it just quite organic as well. To fish with that and a fly you've tied yourself and stuff like that is, again, another we're coming at this from another angle, aren't we? Yeah. And that's the great thing of the enthusiasm and love for fishing, that it takes you in all sorts of lots of different directions.
A great way to rediscover where it came from and the origins of fishing, and you can sort of dip back into history because it is so rich in history and go, wow, this is what, Isaac Walton used to catch fish, and, and you can have a go yourself. I often thought that would make a great fishing show, would be to sort of pit two fishermen against each other, one fishing the high-tech modern stuff, and the other one going through the ages, fishing what was available to them throughout the ages. That would...
Absolutely. And when you talk about that as well, that's immediately got me thinking about fly patterns as well, because we all get sucked in by this is the fly, this is the fly.
Yeah.
Yet, I've found I've regressed, and I'm sure apologies to my listeners if I've said this before, but I've almost regressed to the stage that with a pheasant tail nymph, I think I can do a lot of things with that.
Yeah.
Just to make subtle changes.
Yes.
And so I can change the collar. I can, have a CDC hackle there. I can have a partridge one. Then I can put a thorax of black, orange, whatever it is, change the ribbing. And then I've got a huge, massive variety of flies without actually doing a lot different.
You could stick a bead on it, get it down. You could, stick it on a bigger hook, catch a salmon. Yeah, I think if you were left in the wilds and you just had a dead pheasant and its feathers and a few hooks, you'd be all right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
There's the show.
Yeah. So we've talked about your love of the chalk streams, and this segue brings us on to the story where we first started talking a little while back now about this pollution of the river and the washing plant that was on the tributary of the Itchen. And how did you become aware of it, and how did that momentum build for what eventually happened? And perhaps you can tell us a little bit ultimately what has happened as well as a result of it.
Sure. So the story is, I live on the Upper Itchen, and I've been fishing it for about 5-6 years, I guess. And the number of fish had just dropped off, literally in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, really dropped off. And as is the case in all these sort of neighborhoods, a lot of the sort of riparians got together and they commissioned the Salmon and Trout Conservation under Nick Measham's guidance. They commissioned Nick Everill, Dr. Nick Everill, I think his name is, to do a fly consensus, to see how the fly life was getting on, the invertebrate life was getting on in the rivers. And alarmingly, we found out that too had sort of fallen off a cliff along with the number of fish. So it doesn't take ironically, it doesn't take a scientist to work out that something's up, and it's obviously pollution. So we had our suspicions for years, because Bakkavor had been using a factory just on the other side of Alresford Ponds, which is a bit of a misnomer. It's a huge mass of water that is one of the headwaters for the Arle and the Itchen, and they'd been dumping the effluent from their daily wash directly into the Alresford Pond, and have been granted licenses from the EA over the years, and as long as they prove that they weren't above a certain amount of phosphates and chemicals and what have you. And then they reapplied. Their license was coming to an end, I think, in 2017, from memory. I may be wrong. They reapplied to the EA, and this is when we all stepped in and said, "You cannot, listen, environmental agents, you cannot extend the permit. You can't allow them to keep doing this." To which the EA said, "Well, we're powerless. We don't have the means that they have, so that every time we say, well, it can't be that chemical, they just, they can basically manipulate the chemical that they're putting in order to get it under the radar of the EA jurisdiction." So this was very frustrating and challenging, and we all sort of banded together with the STNC, and they asked me to run a petition, an online petition, to which I did. I didn't think I'd get the numbers I did, and within weeks we had like 7,000 or 8,000 people, I think, that signed this thing. And so we sent that up to I think it was Michael Gove at the time, who was the environmental minister of the environment. I think, I may be wrong, but it landed on his desk, and one of his team said, "Yeah, we'll look at this." And then it sort of went away, as these things do, rather ominously. Yeah, we were looking at it, and we kept very close eyeballs on the EA extending this license for Bakkavor, and we heard that they were about to potentially be granted the extension they wanted. So I reached back out to the signatories. The STNC did a lot of press for it. There was a small but very well-connected bunch of people that I think pulled the right strings and made the right phone calls. And magically, depending on how you look at it, there was an announcement over the summer that Bakkavor were closing the factory for good, which, we can't all be jumping up and down for joy, because sadly there will be job losses. But we're told that those job losses, they're from a certain level of qualified personnel that can go and find employment elsewhere fairly easily should they wish. But still, it's a double-edged sword. But nevertheless, we got it closed. They would never admit that. But we did, I think. I'll go on record and say that. Take on the mighty legal team, the corporate legal team of Bakkavor, see what happens. And we've just got to make sure that, we don't get someone else because it's kitted out to be a salad washing plant, right? So it would be very easy for someone to sneak in there, another company perhaps, or maybe one of the Crest companies, and continue and pick up the slack where Bakkavor left off. So we just got to make sure that doesn't happen. I'd like to turn it into some sort of fly fishing museum and fishing school, because it's right on the ponds there. But I've been so far that's been politely laughed at as an idea, but you never know. So that was the journey, and off the back of that, we helped Howard Taylor take on Southern Water with the abstraction problems down there on the lower test, with the same petition. And I told the people who had signed for the Bakkavor issue, I told them about the abstraction situation. They signed that, and we got that through as well. And Southern Water backed off there. So there's something still to be said for sort of, get a powerful or just get a bunch of people together and get them to tell them a compelling story and get them to sign their support, and you can make a difference.
Am I right that I've got loads of questions now that have come as a result of that? But am I right in thinking Bakkavor have got other washing plants on other rivers in the area as well?
Not in the area, I don't think, but they certainly have other washing plants, and it's not just Bakkavor, sadly. And this. There are hundreds of industrial plants, whether they be salad washing, sewage treatment, agricultural treatment, manufacturing, that are deliberately that were built by rivers back in the day because it was easy for the carry away, for dumping what they needed to dump basically in the rivers, and that still goes on at an alarming rate today. And we see this sort of mini defeat, if you like, of Bakkavor, hopefully recognizing that you can't be dumping untreated chemicals into a SSSI river, as a sort of flagship example that we can then roll out. And I know the STNC have got plans to do so, and other NGOs have. So hopefully this is, as I say, a flagship example, which will bring about awareness as to the other problems nationally, I think, in the rivers.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because that practice is pretty much Victorian, isn't it?
Yeah.
An industrial revolution, right? We'll throw whatever we've got in the river. And I know there's this argument, rivers are cleaner than 100 years ago sort of thing. But that practice is exactly what was happening at that time, wasn't it? It's extraordinary. Yeah. It was still being allowed to go on.
Yeah, rivers were one big toilet. Now the younger generation, or perhaps the more enlightened, or certainly fishermen and people that use the rivers and enjoy the rivers, realize that they really need to be looked after, and we can't continue like this. But it's the age-old thing, is out of sight, out of mind. And people were walking up and down this chalk stream, the Itchen, when Bakkavor were polluting it, and they were going, "Oh, look how healthy this river is! Look, you can see the bottom. You look how much weed there is." And and occasionally I'd hear them. I say, "Yeah, can you see any fish? Can you see any fly life? Can you see any otters? Can you see any kingfishers? Whatever. Can you see any of these things that we should be seeing in abundance at this time of year? In this part of the world." "Oh no, why is that?" "Well, it's being badly poisoned by a salad plantation up the road." "Oh, really? It doesn't look. It looks really nice." And you're like, "Well, that's the problem, isn't it?"
Yeah.
If they see it. Unless there are shopping trolleys floating down it, they think it's okay, and that's where awareness needs to be brought about.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. You talk about the ecosystem there because it feeds all the way through, doesn't it? We lose the insects, we lose the fish, we lose the birds, we lose everything that goes with that. The otters, everything goes with that, then, doesn't it?
Mm.
And then that's where the wider public again possibly are engaged. And one of the interesting things I saw when I was doing research for this, and the case and everything else, that your local newspaper, and excuse me, I can't remember their name, but were really quite publicising the case of what was going on and the salad washing plant and everything. And they seem to be quite behind that as well, and were happy to talk about these issues as well. I thought that was really, really commendable.
Yeah, I mean that's just an extension of if you have a strong enough story, a compelling enough issue that needs rectifying, and you have a groundswell of people that you can educate about it, such as getting a petition going, and social media is so useful in that respect. Then papers almost have a duty to report on it, and they also know that they're going to sell papers if they're going to support these things. In fact, we got so much support. The only support we didn't get, and I won't name him, but our local MP we said, no, it's all about jobs. Of course, it's all about jobs, which I understand. And there is no pollution. Bakkavor have told me that what they're putting in the river's clean. So I thought, okay, well, 7,000 signatures would say otherwise. But anyway, we had the last laugh, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned in that as well, Cress Farms, and is that a similar sort of case? Is there phosphates getting into the river via those, and are they a potential sort of in the crosshairs as well, potentially?
Potentially, there are. I mean, being in Hampshire, obviously there are many different cress beds, and therefore many different companies. Some are better than others. But yeah, phosphates, what they spray on the cress to make it grow, to clean it, to rid it of all the pesticides and things. These phosphates make their way into the rivers. Again, sadly, it's about money and power. A lot of these huge watercress companies now simply can just, ride roughshod over the EA, and for every piece of bureaucratic legislation the EA tried to impose on them, they will just change the goalposts with money. Basically, they have better scientists, they have better equipment, so they're always one step ahead. So yes, some of the cress companies, I wouldn't say some of them are pretty good actually, and hopefully this is what's the way to come, even in aquaculture. Sorry, just to sort of digress and spur off there, but even in aquaculture and fish farms, I think they're realizing now that it's a bleak outlook, certainly publicly, if they continue to practice the way they do. So what they need to do is actually work alongside and have mature conversations with NGOs, and become aware of them and respect them, because they know that actually they're probably more powerful than the government bodies that are meant to be regulating these things. So I think with the watercress beds, it's the same deal. Any sort of farming, whether it be fish farming or cress farming or whatever it is, where we use our waterways, our oceans, I'm hoping we're at a corner now where big business and money is starting to pay attention to small NGOs who are getting bigger and bigger support, especially in view of what's going on at the moment. So fingers crossed.
That's really interesting. I wanted to touch on a couple of people you mentioned there, and Nick Measham, who's been a guest on here as well, who's now CEO of Salmon and Trout Conservation, and carrying on from the work that Paul Knight has done. He's just hit the ground running, hasn't he?
Yeah, Nick is just the breath of fresh air in the world of conservation of salmon, trout, rivers, everything. I mean, he really is. He's a highly intelligent, driven human being, very charming, and I have a lot of time for Nick, as I do for, any NGO. I run a charity myself. It's not fish related, but my wife and I run a charity for pediatric causes, and we do recognize that gone are the days where charities are like businesses competing for the same buck. If you're all working for the same cause, then you need to link arms and share your data and be magnanimous and sort of be open-minded. And I think that's the beauty of there are a small number of NGOs, that I'm aware of, the Angling Trust, STNC, Atlantic Salmon Trust. And I think for the most part, it's great that they're all fighting the same battle. Sometimes I know there's the odd disgruntlement and disagreement about policy, but I think actually if we all sat down and sat around a table, we sort of could work out those minor wrinkles and sort of pat everybody on the back, say you're all doing a fantastic job, keep fighting the fight because it's making a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. You also mentioned Howard Taylor, and funnily enough, the fishing I booked for my friend was via Howard, who I think's a really cool guy. In that I fished a beat that he'd taken on. He said to Brett and I, "Go and have a look up there and tell me what you think." And we fished this, but we walked some of it with him. And it was fascinating because, as you alluded to, and sometimes chalk streams do get a bad rap because of stocking and stuff, but all he was interested in was saying, right, look, we could improve this here, we could improve that there, and make things a little bit better. And I think that was really lovely to hear. And again, he's been a guest on the podcast and speaks eloquently and passionately about the rivers that mean so much to him as well.
Yeah, he's great news. I think, is that the beat? I won't mention its name. It's up on the Upper Test.
Yeah, just up from him, and we walked there.
Yeah, and he's in a great position, isn't he? He's got some serious financial backing to try and, not that it needed turning around, but to really rewild it, I think is the right expression, and to try and sort of get that delicate balance between stockfish and wild fish. So yeah, people like Howard. I mean, listen, there are very few baddies in the world of fly fishing and guiding and fishing agents and the whole spectrum of this sport. There's very few people that are backward thinking or don't want the right thing to happen. It's just about creating awareness beyond fishing, isn't it? Really, I know we're on a fishing podcast, and it's absolutely right that fishermen should shout loudly and proudly about what needs to be done in order to be heard. But the trick is to convince the person who doesn't give a damn about fishing, and also convince them that you're not just fighting this battle because you want to be able to catch fish when you go and fish, because who cares really? I mean, apart from fishermen, and educate them about the wider aspect of why our rivers and our oceans are our barometers for the wider world, and we really need to look after them because a lot of them are in trouble. So yeah, I think I've never met anyone that I didn't like on the riverbank, I think, to answer your question. Yeah.
And Howard, again, because I wanted to mention him on this as well, simply because it was him, it must have been 3 or 4 years ago, that sort of gave me one of those Matrix awakening moments when he told me about, the damage of sewage treatment works and what they were doing and how they were trying to fight these huge water companies with limitless pockets to pay high-level lawyers to take them on, that it was such a hard battle. And it really made me, it still does now when I'm thinking about it, and it made me angry. And I'm thinking, wow, that was only, I was kind of aware of pollution incidents and emptying of tanks but it really made me realize we have to do something. And that's, again, takes us to the beginning, doesn't it? Where we were saying that the volume is turning up a little bit more now. And I sincerely hope long may that continue and people continue to listen, as we've said a number of times here, on a wider spectrum as well, that we reach the general public as a whole, don't we?
Yeah, I guess we just got to keep going. I mean, it's great that young people are coming into the sport who have social media followings, because arguably the young have the biggest platform they've ever had, which is great, as long as they, in our case, use it properly. It's a really, I think it's a really special time, and we should harness the popularity that the sport is enjoying at the moment, because it won't last forever. I don't think. It's a fashion after all, for the most part, for a lot of young people. And I think as and when life goes to some sort of back to normal, we might be a little bit forgotten. I'm hoping that there'll be a few people that stick around, but now is the time to really bang the drum and say, look, we need support. We need to be listened to. We need help, and we need everybody to become painfully aware of the troubles that, a lot of our rivers and a lot of our oceans and a lot of our coastlines and a lot of our species and are facing. Look at the NGOs, read the blurb, get behind, support, donate, do whatever you can to help.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that a retweet, a share, whatever, does make a difference, doesn't it?
It's huge. It's huge. I'm going on an ITV talk show, I think, next week. And normally I get invited on those when I'm in a TV show, and you go on and you promote whatever TV show you're doing, and you get your 2 minutes, and that's that. And I'm filming something at the moment, but it's not due out till next year. So they asked me on this show, and I said, yeah, sure, but what's it about? And they said, oh, they want you to talk about fly fishing, and they want you to teach the host how to fly fish. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely, yeah, of course, why not? So that's got to be a litmus test, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And I suppose, and I've alluded to it in previous podcasts as well, the White House and Mortimer has done nothing but good for fishing. And okay, so, I don't watch that program as a fisherman. I watch it as somebody who's watching an enjoyable, engaging program that is promoting it. And it was wonderful how they got Fergal into that as well, to talk about it, and about the sewage issues and the pollution issues and everything else, that it was wonderful to do that. I hear they've got a 4th series as well, which is fantastic.
It's great. They've just had a fourth one commissioned. I mean, I know Paul a little bit, and when that first came on, I've said I'm really excited about seeing this, Paul, but I'm not. What's it about? And he, being typically modest, he says about 2 old farts that have had heart problems, and I take Bob fishing to try and get him into fishing, and I thought, it sounds a little bit prosaic. I mean, obviously, with those two presenting it transcends what people think about fishing and sort of destigmatizes it a bit. But who knew that it was going to be the sort of runaway hit? And it is exactly that. If you can get fishing and the world that it is based in, and you can open it up to a wider audience and make them enjoy it despite just fishing, or as well as just fishing, then you've cracked it. That's the holy grail, and they've managed to do it. So hats off to them.
Yeah, and I've looked at things like I think it's called Digital Spy, that they have TV forums. So on the Monday after it's been out, I always look to see, and you see these things that people are saying, well, I don't fish, but it's such a cool program, and it makes me want to do it. Now, how cool is that to have that platform?
I mean, that's brilliant. And if you look, and it's not just Paul and Bob. If you look at Instagram or whatever, any of these social media platforms, or YouTube, and you look at some of the fly fishing films. I mean, for me, obviously it's fly fishing, but some of the fly fishing films that are coming out now that, these big name companies like Patagonia are getting behind, the footage is off the charts. I show it to friends who aren't fishermen, and they go, it's like watching a climbing documentary or a surfing documentary. It's that sort of, you know, it's very dynamic and exciting and alluring, and it, you know, it defies anybody who's not able-bodied and likes to be outside, not wanting to give it a try. And I think that's such a great thing. And Paul and Bob being slightly older and still getting people to want to go fishing is brilliant, because let's face it, they do very little fishing in the show, or Bob does anyway.
Falling.
Paul does all the fishing, and Bob has a crack and cooks something, and you know, it's still great.
Yeah, it works well. It's interesting you mentioned companies like Patagonia, because obviously they're leading the way with taking on environmental issues, and the company was formed really from that
Yeah.
point of view as well. And you talked about younger people on Instagram posting pictures and fishing pictures. The really interesting thing for me is seeing how many are wearing Patagonia hats.
I know. I know. I it's funny, isn't it? I don't quite understand the world of endorsements and sponsorship. But I'm told that actually Patagonia, he was telling me this the other day, someone who I think is sponsored by them said they don't, you can't go to Patagonia and ask for sponsorship because they're not interested. They won't give it to you if you're, I don't know, if you've got a fishing show or whatever. They like to give it to people who live and breathe it, the real deal. And they will run their slide rule over you to make sure you're authentically obsessed and a complete nerd in whatever you do, which I think is lovely. But as you say, that, you know, these guys are littered in these sort of in these brands, aren't they? Which I think is a good thing. I don't know how it works.
Yeah, I think so. I guess what I was getting at was that people were into the brand because of what it stood for, so supported the brand by buying the cap. And I wonder how much of that, to me, you know, I think that's really cool that they're engaging those sorts of people. And probably I know them a little bit. I don't think, as you say, they're giving people this stuff to put it out there. People are actually physically going out and buying it.
Yeah.
A, because it's got a funky logo, but B, because, and this is the bit I hope the most, is that they dig what the company are actually doing and want to support them. And that's awesome in my book.
Yeah, I think if that's the case, and I'm sure it is, then absolutely. I know they're a non-profit organization, and so all their money goes back into conservation. So yeah, absolutely. If people are buying that brand because of what it stands for, then that's incredible, and they have achieved a miracle there. Isn't that fantastic? Sort of a small brand that started off just to sort of safeguard nature, if you like, and he was a climber, wasn't he, and a fly fisherman, and now they're a cool, funky young brand because people go, I know if I buy this, the money will go to a good cause. That's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of what they're actually doing. So where is it coming from a fishing perspective? It's for you that it sounds as though you've done a lot and fished in some really cool places. Do you have a favorite?
Well, I'm lucky because what I do for a living, on the whole, I get to travel a lot, and I'm really lucky in that respect. And that's one of the reasons why I sort of continue to plug away at it. And wherever I go, I pack a rod. And I've been doing that for about 10, 15 years. And because of that, I worked a lot in America and Canada about 10 years ago for about 5 years. And so my favorite place, I guess, or one of my favorite places is the west coast of Canada and up in BC, and then up towards the Yukon, really, and Terrace and up there, you know, the steelhead up there are just incredible, as are the salmon. So I would say if I had to name one place, it'd either be there or it would be Iceland. I mean, I've been really lucky. I was invited to go and to film an episode of an Icelandic fishing show last year. I think it was the year before, I can't remember. So we were spoilt. Myself and Robson Green were invited onto some incredible rivers, and then that opened my eyes to, like, this is what salmon fishing should be like, and probably was like. So that's why we went back this year during the pandemic to film a documentary out there. And again, because of the pandemic, we were incredibly lucky. And all those rivers that you would not get on for love nor a lot of money were like, yeah, please come back, guys. Come and shoot on our river. It'd be great for business for us. And you know, you're gonna catch some great salmon. So we 3 weeks we were filming out there, and we've I think we got on about 10 rivers, and we just caught some of the most life-changing fish, some trophy fish. It was just mind-blowing. So I'm being spoiled, but I would say Iceland probably is now pipping Canada for the top post. Yeah.
And do you have a place that you've always wanted to fish that you've never fished that you would really love to go visit and spend some time fishing?
Yeah, several. I mean, this is why I want to take this road show of fly fishing and mental health. You know, I want it to keep going and to take me to these places. But New Zealand, I've been to New Zealand years ago, but I wasn't fishing at the time. So New Zealand, I'd love to go and do a proper stint out there. I'd love to. Do you know what? I'd love to go and spend some serious time on the River Wye, because it's such a beautiful location, and I grew up near there. But at the time, I wasn't fishing that much, and I'd love to revisit it and go, this is what you could have been. I know it's not a great place for salmon, but hopefully that might change. And even just for some trout or whatever, or some grayling, I'd love to go and stand in the golden valley that is the River Wye on a lovely spring day and just suck it all up. So yeah, I mean, anywhere, Pete. Anywhere that has some wild game fish, I'm down. I'm there. I don't care. You know, it's all good to me.
That sounds good to me, and it sounds to me like I don't need to ask the question. You're loving it as more as ever, because that's clearly the case, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. The older I get, the more the more joy I find in it. The more I learn. That's the beauty of fly fishing, as you know. You can never know enough. You can never master it. There's always something else to learn. I think that's what keeps it so exciting for me. And the older I get, the more the easier, I guess, it is to potentially travel, or present time accepted. And also being a dad of a young girl, I've got a 10-year-old daughter, and she's just starting to show interest, and I'm sort of not forcing her into it, because I know that that's the worst thing you can do. But I have grand illusions of taking around the world fly fishing. So yeah, I'm as keen as I ever have been.
It sounds like you're playing it exactly right with your daughter as well. I have a daughter who's a fair bit older now, but we didn't force it. It was inevitable, and we didn't force it. And I used to take her to the shop and let her get a little fly box and choose some flies and stuff like that. And then it drifted away. And we did a road trip. Again, apologies, listeners, if I've mentioned this before, but we did a road trip to Montana.
Oh.
And it was sort of seeing everything, just the two of us. And we were going into Yellowstone, into the park there. And I said, look, I've got to buy a special license to fish there, because you can buy a state license, I'm sure you know. But I said, I've got to buy a special license to fish in the park. And she said, would you get me one? And I said, I'm not crying. Honestly, I'm not crying.
Oh, what a lovely story. How did that go?
It went really well. We fished the Gallatin together, just inside the park there. So it's the Upper Gallatin, and we fished that together. We fished the Yellowstone, and she caught fish. And it was just, I never forced it still, even at that age. I never forced it. And I tried to always make it fun. But there was really, really special. And, we'll see some. I said, oh, we fished there. Do you remember? And, we'd be out on the road. So we just drove. We drove miles and miles and miles. And we saw a sign, 80 miles to Two Bridges, which is where Winston rods are made.
Yeah.
And I said, we go and have a look. And so we did. And we saw. And it's lovely, because you see these companies, and people knock them sometimes and assume they're huge, great company.
Yeah.
It's not very big.
No.
And it's run by passionate anglers right on the river there. And it was fascinating to see. It wasn't a lot to see, I have to say, but it just to say I'd seen it and those sorts of things. And I really sincerely hope that you're able to do those sorts of journeys with your daughter and enjoy those special moments with her too.
Well, that's really inspired me to get on a plane and do a daddy-daughter road trip around the rivers of America and Montana and Wyoming, and that would be a hell of a road trip. I'm definitely that'll be my present to her. Let's hope that she appreciates it as much as I appreciate giving it to her.
We just made it up as. It was lovely. We made it up as we went along. We didn't book anything, and we ended up on the Madison and fished there. And I think she caught some fish on the Madison as well. And it's just awesome, And I hope it does play out. I hope you do introduce her into our wonderful world of fly fishing.
Yeah, me too.
Cool, Jim. Well, we've spoken for over an hour. It's been fantastic. We covered so much. I hope this has been an inspiration to our listeners on so many levels about picking up the cudgels and taking the fight to these companies. Just finishing off, what else do you think people could do, Jim, if they're noticing things are happening to the river? What advice would you give somebody to get the ball rolling?
What you mean if they think that there might be something untoward or
Yeah.
I would. I mean, I'd like to say tell the EA, but I'd be lying if I thought that would be good advice. Sadly, I think the best thing to do is go online, look at any local charity that supports your rivers, or else go to the big ones like Salmon and Trout Conservation. There will always be an info email address to get in touch and just voice your concerns. And if you're right, then that's great. You know, you might be help save the river. But certainly don't keep quiet about it, because, you know, if we all keep quiet, nothing will happen. I think we've got to be more vociferous, and we've got to be more, we've got to be louder with this thing.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, I've been doing it, and I try and retweet as we spoke earlier. And if there's something I don't like, I'll tag James Bevan from the EA, and I would recommend everyone does that.
Yeah.
And we continue to do that to let him know. I know he's aware of it, but we just keep on at them and just keep on and engage the wider community.
That's a great idea. I should have said that. Take photos, put it on your Twitter or your Instagram. You know, tag in somebody, you know, just tag in river pollution or whatever it is, and someone hopefully somewhere will see it who might know, who might have the answer to your question. And I think that's going to be potentially a better way to get the issue raised than you know, the more traditional methods of getting in touch with your local government body, sadly.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim, so much for being such a wonderful, engaging guest. Thank you for everything you've done in your neck of the woods. And I hope, as I said, it inspires people to fight these issues that need fighting. We've got evidence here that it works as well. So we've just got to keep on. Thank you so much for being a guest today, Jim.
My pleasure, Pete. Thank you for having me. It's been great fun.
Lovely. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. There are plenty more planned. I hope you continue to enjoy them. Thank you so much.